Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Speak and Feel English, the podcast where we don't just learn English, but we connect, grow, and truly understand ourselves through meaningful conversations. I'm Mia.
And I'm Ethan. Today's topic is something that almost everyone struggles with at some point in their life, yet not everyone talks about openly. Don't give up on yourself. It sounds simple, but in reality, it can be one of the hardest things to practice consistently.
Absolutely. There are moments when people feel exhausted, discouraged, and even invisible in their own journey. They look at others progressing, succeeding, and moving ahead, and they start questioning their own worth. And that's where the danger begins. Not outside, but inside their own thoughts.
Yes, and what's interesting is that giving up on yourself doesn't always happen suddenly. It's not always one big moment. Sometimes it's quiet. It's gradual. It starts with small doubts like, maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe this just isn't for me. And slowly, those thoughts become beliefs.
That's such an important point. People often think failure is the biggest threat, but honestly, self-doubt is far more dangerous because failure can teach you something. But when you start doubting yourself, you stop trying altogether. And when you stop trying, you lose opportunities that could have changed your life.
Exactly. And I think one of the reasons people give up on themselves is because they set unrealistic expectations. They want quick results. They want immediate success. But when things take time, they feel like they're doing something wrong.
Yes, and social comparison makes it even worse. You see someone achieving something in a short time, and you start questioning your own pace. But what people forget is that everyone's journey is different. Just because someone else reached a milestone faster doesn't mean you're failing.
That's true. And I think we need to normalize the idea that progress is not always visible. Sometimes you're growing internally, building patience, resilience, discipline, and those things don't show immediately, but they matter more than quick success.
I completely agree. In fact, I believe that the moments when you feel like giving up are actually the moments when you are closest to a breakthrough. But because it feels uncomfortable, people walk away too soon.
That's powerful, and it reminds me of something. Most people don't fail because they aren't capable. They fail because they quit too early. They underestimate how much persistence really matters.
Yes, and persistence is not about being perfect every day. It's about showing up, even when you don't feel motivated, even when things are not going your way, even when you feel like you're not making progress.
And that's where discipline comes in. Motivation is temporary. It comes and goes. But discipline is what keeps you moving forward when motivation disappears.
Exactly, and I think we also need to talk about self-compassion here. People are often very harsh on themselves. They expect perfection, and when they don't achieve it, they criticize themselves instead of understanding their own struggles.
Yes, and that internal criticism can be very damaging. Imagine having someone constantly telling you that you're not good enough. It would be exhausting, but many people do that to themselves every single day.
That's so true. And the sad part is, people don't even realize it. They think being hard on themselves will push them to improve, but in reality, it often leads to burnout and self-doubt.
So, if someone is listening to this right now and feeling like giving up, what would you say to them?
I would say, pause for a moment, take a deep breath, and ask yourself one question. Why did I start? Because often, in the middle of the struggle, we forget the reason that once inspired us.
That's a great question. Reconnecting with your purpose can change everything. It can remind you that your journey has meaning, even if it's difficult right now.
Yes, and I would also tell them that it's okay to feel tired. It's okay to feel lost sometimes, but it's not okay to completely abandon yourself. You deserve your own support, especially during tough times.
That's beautifully said. And I think that's the core message of today's episode. No matter how hard things get, don't give up on yourself, because at the end of the day, you are the only person who can truly shape your future.
Exactly. And even if progress feels slow, it's still progress. Even if it feels like nothing is changing, something is happening inside you. Growth is often invisible before it becomes visible.
And that's something people need to trust, the process. Trust that your efforts are not wasted. Trust that every step you take, no matter how small, is moving you forward.
Yes, and remember, giving up might feel like relief in the moment, but it often leads to regret later, while continuing, even when it's hard, builds strength and confidence over time.
I think it's important to understand that this loss of confidence doesn't come from nowhere. It usually builds over time through repeated experiences.
Yes, absolutely. Many times it starts with small disappointments. Maybe someone tried something and failed. Then they tried again and it didn't work out. And after a few attempts, they begin to form a narrative in their mind. This always happens to me, or I'm just not capable.
And the problem with that narrative is that it becomes self-reinforcing. Once you believe you're not capable, you start approaching situations with fear instead of confidence. And that fear affects your actions, which then leads to more negative outcomes.
Exactly. It's like a cycle. Your thoughts influence your actions, and your actions reinforce your thoughts. So if your mindset is negative, it becomes very difficult to break out of that loop unless you consciously interrupt it.
And I think another major factor is past criticism. A lot of people carry words from their past, things that someone once said to them, maybe a teacher, a friend, or even a family member. And even though those words were said long ago, they still affect how they see themselves today.
That's so true. Sometimes one negative comment can stay in someone's mind for years, and over time they start believing it, even if it's not true. They stop seeing their strengths and focus only on their weaknesses.
And when that happens, people begin to limit themselves. They stop trying new things. They avoid challenges. Not because they don't want to grow, but because they're afraid of confirming their own doubts.
Yes, and that fear can be paralyzing. But what people don't realize is that avoiding challenges doesn't protect them. It actually keeps them stuck. Growth only happens when you step outside your comfort zone.
That's an important point. And I think we also need to talk about perfectionism here, because a lot of people don't give up on themselves due to lack of ability. They give up because they feel like they're not perfect.
Exactly. Perfectionism creates unrealistic standards. It makes people believe that if something isn't perfect, it's not worth doing at all. And that mindset can stop progress completely.
Yes, because in reality, progress is messy. It involves mistakes, learning, and improvement over time. But if you expect perfection from the start, you'll always feel like you're falling short.
And that leads to frustration. And eventually, that frustration turns into self-doubt. And that self-doubt can lead to giving up. It's all connected.
So the question is, how do we break this cycle? How does someone go from doubting themselves to believing in themselves again?
I think the first step is awareness. You need to recognize your own negative thoughts, because many times people are not even aware of how harsh they are with themselves.
That's true. And once you become aware, you can start questioning those thoughts. Instead of accepting them as truth, you can ask, is this really true, or is this just my fear talking?
Exactly. And that simple shift can make a big difference. Because not every thought you have is a fact. Some thoughts are just reflections of your past experiences or insecurities.
And another important step is to change how you define failure. Instead of seeing failure as something negative, try to see it as feedback. Every failure teaches you something valuable.
Yes, and I think people often underestimate how important that shift is. When you stop fearing failure, you become more willing to try. And when you try more, you increase your chances of success.
And that's where confidence starts to rebuild,
through action, not through thinking, not through waiting, but actually doing something, even if it's small.
Absolutely. Confidence is not something you magically gain. It's something you build over time by keeping promises to yourself. Even small actions can create a sense of achievement.
That's such a practical way to look at it. Instead of focusing on big goals, start with small, manageable steps. And as you complete those steps, your belief in yourself gradually increases.
Yes, and consistency is key here. It's not about doing something once and expecting a big change. It's about showing up regularly, even when it feels difficult.
And I think it's also important to surround yourself with the right environment, because the people around you can influence your mindset more than you realize.
That's so true. If you're constantly around negativity, it becomes harder to stay positive. But if you surround yourself with supportive and encouraging people, it can make a huge difference.
And even if you don't have that kind of environment right now, you can create it in other ways, through books, podcasts, or content that inspires you and reminds you of your potential.
Yes, because sometimes all you need is a small reminder that you are capable, that you are not alone, and that your journey matters.
And I think that's something everyone needs to hear. Your journey matters. Even if no one else sees it, even if it feels slow, it still has value.
Exactly. And rebuilding belief in yourself is not a one-time process. It's something you have to practice every day. Some days will be easier and some days will be harder.
But what matters is that you keep going, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days.
Yes, because those are the days that truly define your strength. Not when everything is easy, but when you choose to continue despite the difficulty.
Let's move into something very practical now. We've talked about why people lose belief in themselves, but now the real question is, what can someone actually do when they feel like giving up?
Yes, because understanding the problem is important, but action is what creates change. And I think the first practical step is to break things down. When people feel overwhelmed, it's usually because they're looking at the entire journey instead of focusing on the next step.
That's true. When a goal feels too big, it becomes intimidating. But when you divide it into smaller parts, it becomes manageable. Instead of thinking, I have to achieve everything, you start thinking, what can I do today?
Exactly, and that simple shift can reduce a lot of pressure. Because progress doesn't come from one big action, it comes from consistent small actions repeated over time.
And I think another important strategy is tracking your progress. Many people feel like they're not improving simply because they don't notice their own growth.
Yes, that's such a good point. When you write down what you've done, even small achievements, you start seeing evidence of your effort. And that builds confidence because it reminds you that you are moving forward.
And this connects to something else, celebrating small wins. People often wait for big success to feel proud, but that can take time. If you don't acknowledge small progress, you'll always feel like you're behind.
Absolutely. Even something as simple as completing a task you were avoiding or showing up when you didn't feel like it. Those are wins, and recognizing them can shift your mindset from frustration to motivation.
And I think we should also talk about routines because discipline becomes easier when you have a structure in place. Instead of relying on motivation, you create habits that guide your actions.
Yes, routines create stability. When you have a daily structure, you don't have to constantly decide what to do. You just follow the process, and that reduces mental fatigue.
And even if the routine is simple, consistency matters more than intensity. Doing a little every day is far more effective than doing a lot once in a while.
Exactly. And another thing that helps is limiting distractions, because sometimes people don't give up because they're incapable. They give up because they're constantly distracted and lose focus.
That's very true. In today's environment, it's easy to get pulled in different directions, and when your attention is divided, your progress slows, which can lead to frustration.
Yes, so creating focused time for your work is essential. Even if it's just 1 hour of deep focus, it can make a huge difference over time.
And I think we also need to mention the importance of rest because pushing yourself constantly without taking breaks can lead to burnout.
Absolutely. Rest is not a weakness, it's a necessary part of the process. When you rest, you recharge your energy, and that allows you to come back stronger.
And that's something people often misunderstand. They think stopping means giving up, but there's a difference between resting and quitting.
Exactly. Resting is temporary, quitting is permanent, and understanding that difference can help people stay committed without feeling guilty.
And one more thing I'd like to add is self-talk. The way you talk to yourself matters more than you think.
Yes, your internal dialogue shapes your mindset. If you constantly tell yourself that you can't do something, you'll start believing it. But if you encourage yourself, even in small ways, it can boost your confidence.
And this doesn't mean ignoring reality, it means being realistic but supportive. Instead of saying, I can't do this, you can say, this is difficult, but I'm learning.
That's such a powerful shift because it allows you to acknowledge the challenge without giving up on yourself.
And I think when people start applying these small strategies consistently, they begin to see a change, not overnight, but gradually.
Yes, and that gradual change is what builds lasting confidence because it's based on real effort, not temporary motivation.
Let's talk about something that everyone faces but often struggles to handle: setbacks. No matter how motivated or disciplined you are, setbacks are a part of the journey.
Yes, and I think setbacks are one of the biggest reasons why people give up on themselves. Because when something doesn't go as planned, it creates disappointment and sometimes even self-doubt.
And the emotional impact can be strong. People start questioning their abilities, their decisions, and sometimes even their entire path.
That's true. But I think it's important to understand that setbacks are not a sign that you should stop. They're a sign that you're trying.
Exactly. If you never faced setbacks, it would probably mean you're not challenging yourself enough. Growth and discomfort often go hand in hand.
Yes, and I think one of the most important things during a setback is how you respond to it, because your response determines whether you move forward or stay stuck.
And many people respond with self-criticism. They blame themselves, they feel ashamed, and that emotional weight makes it harder to continue.
That's why self-compassion is so important. Instead of being harsh on yourself, try to understand what went wrong and what you can learn from it.
And that shift from judgment to curiosity can make a big difference. Instead of asking, why did I fail, you ask, what can I improve?
Exactly. And I think it's also important to give yourself time to process emotions. You don't have to be strong all the time. It's okay to feel disappointed.
Yes, emotions are natural. Ignoring them doesn't make them disappear. But at the same time, you shouldn't let them control your actions for too long.
Right. Feel the emotion, but don't let it define your future, because one bad moment does not define your entire journey.
And I think perspective is very important here. Sometimes what feels like a failure in the moment can actually lead to something better later.
Yes, many successful people have stories where their biggest setbacks eventually became turning points, but they only realized that because they didn't give up.
And that's the key, staying in the game. Because as long as you keep going, there is always a possibility of improvement.
Exactly. And I think another helpful approach is to focus on what you can control. You may not control the outcome, but you can control your effort, your attitude, and your consistency.
That's a very empowering mindset because it shifts your focus from things you can't change to things you can.
And that sense of control can reduce anxiety and help you move forward with more confidence.
And I think it's also helpful to remind yourself of past challenges you've overcome, because that reminds you that you are capable of handling difficult situations.
Yes, looking back at your own journey can be very powerful. It shows you that you faced struggles before and still continued.
And that builds resilience, because resilience is not about avoiding difficulties, it's about learning how to deal with them.
Exactly. And when you start seeing setbacks as part of the process, they become less intimidating.
And that's when you stop fearing failure and start focusing on growth.
Yes, and I think that's a mindset everyone should develop. Not avoiding challenges, but embracing them as opportunities to grow.
And with that mindset, giving up becomes less likely because you start seeing difficulties differently. So, as we come to the final part of this conversation, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've discussed so far.
Yes, we talked about self-doubt, fear, setbacks, and practical strategies. But at the core of all of this is one simple idea. You should never give up on yourself.
Because at the end of the day, your relationship with yourself is the most important one. If you stop believing in yourself, it becomes very difficult for anything else to work.
Exactly. And believing in yourself doesn't mean you always feel confident. It means you keep going even when you don't feel confident.
That's such an important distinction. Confidence is not a requirement to start, it's a result of continuing.
Yes, and I think people need to understand that progress takes time. There's no instant transformation. There's no perfect moment. There is only the decision to keep moving forward.
And that decision has to be made again and again, not just once. Because there will be days when you feel strong, and there will be days when you feel like giving up.
But those difficult days are the ones that matter the most, because choosing to continue on those days builds real strength.
And I think it's also important to trust yourself. Trust that you are capable of learning, improving, and growing over time.
Yes, because you don't need to have everything figured out right now. You just need to take the next step.
And sometimes that next step is very small, but small steps taken consistently can lead to big changes.
Exactly. And I want to say this to anyone listening. You are not behind. You are not too late. You are on your own path, and your journey is valid.
And even if things feel uncertain right now, that doesn't mean they will always stay that way. Change is always possible.
Yes, and as long as you don't give up on yourself, there is always hope. There is always a chance to improve, to grow, and to create a better future.
And that's the message we want to leave you with today. No matter how hard things get, don't give up on yourself.
Because you are stronger than you think, and your story is still being written.
And every effort you make, no matter how small, is a step forward.
Thank you so much for listening to Speak and Feel English. We truly hope this conversation gave you clarity, motivation, and a sense of connection.
If you found value in this episode, make sure to follow the channel and stay connected with us for more meaningful conversations.
And remember, keep speaking, keep growing, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself.
For more videos, subscribe to the channel and explore all our podcasts.
We'll see you in the next episode.